Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Tippie Women's Summit. My name is Barbara Thomas, and I am the Executive Director of Alumni and Constituent Engagement here at the Tippie College, and I will be your moderator today. Now, before we begin the program, we do want to encourage you to participate in some of the Tippie College's virtual events. We do have 2 additional events as a part of the Tippie Women's Summit, as you'll see on your screen here. On March 25th, the Tippie Women's Summit event will feature Tippie Associate Professor Rong Su, who will be speaking on breaking the imposter syndrome. And on Friday, April 1st, we will host an alumni panel to discuss assembling your power players, building networks that support your personal and your professional growth. Now, the alumni participating in this panel discussion come from a range of industries and experiences. And this discussion, which will be led by Tippie faculty member Beth Livingston, promises to be enlightening. Now, both of these events will take place over the noon hour Central Standard Time. And we will place a link to that webpage in the chat. In addition, we will see the return of the Tippie Career webinar series. On April 6th, we will present a program on making the most of your performance review with Dee Hurst. And on May 25th, our program will be on navigating a career pivot, 5 steps to consider when making a change. And that will be with Kara Avis. Now, each of these programs feature the expertise of the Tippie College's Graduate Management Program's Career Services Office. Now, those events will also take place over the noon hour Central Standard Time, and we will include a link to that in the chat as well. So I do want to go over a few housekeeping items. So we have enabled live transcription service, which is offered by Zoom for our hearing impaired guests. Now, if you don't want to see the live transcriptions, you do have the option to turn it off. You can go to the live transcription button, which you should see at the bottom of your screen, and click more. And you should see hide captions or subtitles. That will remove the live transcription. Now, if you like those transcriptions, you can actually adjust the size of those by going into the subtitle settings, and then that will open a window where you can adjust them. All of these are automatically generated transcriptions, and they are only available in English. Also, throughout our panel today, you will be able to provide your own questions for our panelists. You'll see the Q&A button at the bottom. We ask that you just click on that button and type in your question, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can during our session. Finally, all of our virtual presentations are recorded and then shared on the college's YouTube channel. Everyone who has registered for this event will receive an email with a link to that video later on. So now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our leaders today. First is Tippie College of Business Dean Amy Kristof-Brown. Amy was named Dean of the Tippie College in December 2020 after serving as interim dean. She is an award-winning professor of management and entrepreneurship and has served our college in a number of leadership roles throughout her tenure. She has a PhD in organizational behavior and human resource management from the University of Maryland and a BS in psychology from the University of Richmond. Our second leader is Jennifer Blackhurst, who serves as the Associate Dean of Tippie's Graduate Management Programs. A professor of data analytics, Jen is frequently quoted in the media on topics related to supply chain disruptions. She has several degrees in engineering, including a bachelor's and master's in industrial and manufacturing systems engineering from Ohio University and a PhD in industrial engineering from the University of Iowa. Jen began her career at Rockwell Collins before moving into academia. She has taught at North Carolina State and Iowa State before coming to Iowa. And our third leader today, who is joining us, is Nicole Johnston. Nicole is a Tippie alum who graduated in 1994 with a degree in marketing, a certificate in international business, a French minor, and a focus in Spanish. That girl was busy, let me just tell you. She is currently the Chief Sales Officer for the food division of Newell, where she oversees sales, trade marketing, e-commerce, retail execution, shopper marketing, and distributor management. Nicole's career is included an array of roles for such organizations as Kimberly-Clark, Boehringer Ingelheim, and Procter & Gamble. She serves on the Tippie Advisory Board and on the board for the Tippie Marketing Institute. So today we are going to start with some questions that actually were submitted through the registration form. So I'm going to put this question out to each of you, or if it really strikes your fancy, you can jump right in. But what was the biggest obstacle you faced in positioning yourself as a leader? And then how did you overcome that? Nicole, do you want to take that first?
Sure, I'll jump in. Women face different challenges in leadership than men, and there are many expectations that women have that are unfair and frequently assumed. I'm sure you've heard about things like the emotional lift that happens in meetings or in teams where frequently the women end up having to remember who has a birthday or an anniversary or those kinds of things. And it's just assumed that the women will handle it. And my biggest challenge, and the panelists are all about to start to laugh, is I'm very direct. And they're all going to say, yeah, she is. So my biggest challenge was I didn't always position the fact that I saw inequality in the best way. And so I would flat out call out, well, why does a woman have to do it? Instead of maybe recognizing that there was a more gentle and kinder way to say things. So for me, I had to work on how to address the inequalities I saw, but in a way that included people and didn't make them become defensive. So that was probably one of the things I had to work on, because it was very easy for me to see, but I didn't always get people to my side to help solve.
Interesting perspective. Amy, do you have one?
Sure. I'll just say for me, one of the challenges was I have two daughters, and I have a family that I'm very close to. And so honestly, for me, some of the challenges that I faced had to do with simply time and the expectations that I had for myself of how to be the parent that I wanted to be and how to also be a leader simultaneously, because I never want to step into a position where I can't do the things that that position requires. And so sometimes that meant knowing that I wasn't ready for a position simply because I had my own expectations about other things that I wanted to do well. And so I would say maybe that's internal in the sense of, you know, I don't like to do things not well. And so I maybe artificially limited opportunities because of that. Yeah, I'll just go with that.
Yeah. Jen, what about you?
I think mine was and is to this day still internal. So a constant questioning of myself, am I ready for this? Do I have the right experience? I know in this next role, I'm going to be having to do X, Y, Z, and I've never done that before. And so really convincing myself that, yes, I am ready. And I work with great teams of people that, you know, have expertise that I can draw on. So again, building upon what Amy said, really internal challenges for myself that I had to overcome in my own mind.
Our next question was submitted as well, and this one I'm going to send to Amy. I think it's a great question, and Amy definitely has experience with this. And it's talking about transitioning to a role where you now are leading a group of your peers. You know, that is a challenging process. Can you talk on that a bit, Amy?
Yeah, I indicated that this was one that I thought was so interesting in terms of questions, because if you are promoted internally, you will constantly face this challenge as you move up. If you move around to different companies, you don't have that as much, but when you're going internal, it's going to be there. And I think the biggest challenge for me as a leader. It was an eye-opening experience. I went out to lunch with a group of my colleagues who were in my department that I went out to lunch with probably once a week, maybe twice a week. And I had just taken on the role of department chair in the group. And I had somebody at lunch say, well, we can't talk about that now because the boss is here. And like literally shut down a line of conversation that truly a week earlier, I would have been a part of the conversation. And then it became, well, we can't talk about that because the boss is here now. And I was stunned by the level of suddenly mistrust that existed of these people who I had been a partner with and I complained about things with, right, for years. And all of a sudden there was kind of a deference and a distrust of what the role was. And it really bothered me for a while. And then, you know, part of what you come to grips with is the fact that when you do move up, you do have a broader set of responsibilities and accountability. And so in some cases, maybe that person was right, that I wasn't going to just see their side anymore. It was my job to see their side, the other department's side, to see the dean's side, all of those pieces, because that was my responsibility. And that's why I was in that position, was to see multiple perspectives. And they didn't really want to hear multiple perspectives. They just wanted to talk about their perspective. So, you know, one of the lessons learned, I think, is to recognize that's going to happen and it's natural, and that it's actually probably okay because of the fact that you do now have responsibility to different areas. Not to take that personally is a little bit harder, but that's there.
Yeah, definitely. Nicole, I'm going to go to you next. You've been in a number of different roles with different companies. What proactive steps can people take to prepare themselves for leadership? And specifically, let's also talk about skill sets. You know, as people move on, you know, it's experience in, is it things like managing staff, dealing with budgets, etc.?
In any role you're in, there are things that you can learn, whether it is things you really like that you see someone do or things that you think, oh my goodness, that's horrible. I never want to see that again. The important thing is to recognize that in each role, there's knowledge and experience and skills that are necessary. And the further you get away from those roles, the less you will remember about what you did. So as you're preparing for leadership, think about the pain points that you have. Think about the bottlenecks that you have. Think about what works incredibly well. And you want to make sure you don't lose touch with that. The other thing I would say is you need to plan for who is going to be your ally, who's going to help you get things done. So like, for example, I'm in sales. I can't do anything without my brand counterpart, right? So my brand counterpart is my bestie because we have to be completely in lockstep in everything we do. So I intentionally, when I came in, figured out all the people I need to map with in brand who's not part of my responsibility so that we could be aligned. So it's really important to think about not just your specific role, like I might have 4 people reporting to me. You have to think about your impact and you have to go out. And then probably you also have to think about up and who you need to influence and talk to in that as well. And so the natural inclination is to put your head down and think about just your role. But I really encourage you to step back and do an assessment of the broader piece and try to understand the impact of the role, the intent of the role, what's working, what's not working, and then make a plan. And as you're considering that, there are critical experiences that you need to have. I guarantee you the first time you manage people, you're going to be an idiot. We all were. It's a given. And there's going to be things where you're going to say, I can't believe I did that. I'm sorry. It's okay. You're learning, but do a fast follow and figure out how to fix it. It's the same time the first time you go to manage a budget. You're going to figure out there's a secret line in the P&L that you didn't know you had to pay attention to, and something's going to smack you, and you're going to come back and say, got that now, that will never happen again. But that's why it's so critical to have those various experiences so that way you don't get to a really big point where it smacks you, and instead you can learn it at a smaller point. I think one of the challenges that I see is a lot of people are so focused on upward mobility that they don't necessarily get the skills and experiences So that way, when a challenge is thrown at them, they know how to handle it, or they know what the issue is. So instead, if you can think through, if I do that role, it will give me this. If I do this role, I'll learn that. Then it will much better set you up for success to move ahead. The only caveat I say by that, yet again, though, a very female perspective is I have to know with confidence that I can do 98% of this job before I will apply for it. Men think if they understand the title that they can do it. So don't limit yourself based off of your perceptions of I have to know it to do it. Give yourself space and freedom to learn and fail.
Great thoughts. Those are great thoughts. Thank you. Jen, I'm going to go to you next. What are the ways that you keep your team on track within the mission and the vision of an organization?
Yeah, this is a really timely question because when I took over my role within graduate management programs here at the Tippie College, the pandemic was just kicking off. And so a lot of what my team and the college and as a whole focused on was, how are we serving our students? How can we, make sure that we're covering our bases, that we're adapting to meet the needs of our communities, of our students, of the companies that we serve. And we didn't really have time at that point to sit back and set a clear vision and mission because we're moving so fast. And so it actually is super timely because one of the things that we're doing right now is taking the time and saying, okay, what are our core values? How are we best able to help students on their lifelong education journeys? Even what kind of culture do we want to have within our teams that feed into the missions of the college as a whole? So it's been eye-opening in terms of I got to know what we were great at. I got to know about the passions of the people that I work with. And now I can use that to build what we're doing, as well as making sure that we're getting buy-in along the way. And it has been interesting because what we found out, I think, again, it's still ongoing, is that we are a group of people that will adapt very quickly. The focus on the student is always number one. And then, so how can that help us set what we're doing in the future? How can that help us think of new innovative ways to serve students? And to Nicole's point, maybe they fail. Great, but we're always trying something new. We always have this culture of we want to be better.
It's great that you're taking the time to do that. So kudos. I do think that we all, went through, there was so much change in such a short period of time that we're all kind of trying to come up for fresh air and see like, what is the world like now?
Yes.
Now that we're kind of post-pandemic. So the next question I'd love to throw to all three of you, if you could, and that is going to the idea of the pandemic. How has that changed opportunities for women? So is there anybody who wants to take a first stab? How about you, Amy?
I think Nicole's got her mic off. She was ready to jump in on that one. You can go ahead, Nicole. You want to start? Okay, I'll jump in because I get asked this question a lot. I spoke at the Iowa Women Lead Change conference and we talked a little bit about it. And the data is actually really interesting that women were making in the last year prior to the pandemic some pretty good progress at kind of the upper mobility in terms of higher level positions. The percentage of women was just increasing in that at a rate that we hadn't seen previously. During the pandemic, a lot of women got additional opportunities to step up and to kind of go into those higher level positions. There's some interesting challenges with that, right? There is pretty good evidence that there's something called the glass cliff. We're all familiar with the glass ceiling, right? Hard to get through to these upper level positions. The counter to that is the glass cliff, which is, okay, great, you're now in an upper level position, but we've given you an almost impossible task to be able to lead and to come out of successfully. And if you do it, you may be so depleted by the time you're done that you just can't stay in that role. So I think one of the challenges, and I'll leave space for the other panelists to talk about it. I think one of the challenges is, if you are a woman who has stepped into a leadership role, what can you do to sustain your longevity in that role and your ability to come out of crisis management, which is what you were doing, into longer term sustainable organizational growth and thriving. I think that's a huge challenge, and I'll pass it over to the other women for some other points.
How about you, Nicole?
I think one of the biggest changes coming out of the pandemic is the expectations that women have for themselves. So, I was joking because you guys didn't see it, but when the panelists first got on, yes, this would be my cat. Her name is Kinnick. She sits on my lap as we're working. Obviously, that never happened at the office before. And some people first said to me, oh my God, now everybody's like, where's your cat, right? I know that sounds really strange, but it is the fact that more of me is now coming to work. And now my people see that I am a crazy cat lady who, yes, baby talks to my cat and all that kind of stuff, because that's what they see as part of me every day. They also have seen that, my hair is in the bun 99% of the time. I actually wore it down for you today, but it is just how we are. And that authenticity of who it has brought has really provided an opportunity for us to identify as women what we like and don't like about our work and what we do and don't want to do. And I highly encourage you to take that forward as you are making choices and figure out what excites you, what makes you happy, and what makes you feel fulfilled. Because it was before you had to do this, but now it's kind of options off. So that's a big part of it. The secondary part that I would say out of this is that the connectivity is very different, but no less critical. And how might we make sure our teams feel valued? How do they feel seen? How do they feel heard? How are you making sure that you are still remembering to ask, hey, how was your son's baseball game? And you're still understanding those aspects of people's lives, because it's very easy when you're just a floating head in a box to forget all the rest of that. And so instead, making sure we have those discussions and taking the time to say, how was your weekend? Anything going on, versus just jumping into it because you've got Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom. I think that's the other big takeaway I have from this. But the authentic lives paralleled with taking the time to do it, it's an interesting conundrum. But the more you do it, the more people can bring their whole selves to work.
Interesting. What about you, Jen? Any observations?
Yeah, I do think that it has opened up more opportunities. There are more flexible work arrangements, which I really like. Even with how we were promoting some of our graduate programs, trying to remove barriers. This was top of our mind. But I do agree with Nicole that somewhat of a balancing act as well, because with opportunities, more flexibility, then that puts a burden on many women in terms of balancing all of that, balancing the home, balancing, children, and, when a daycare is canceled because of COVID, or, we're in Iowa, a school is shut down, at 7 a.m. Now there's no place for the kids to go to school for the day. So I do think it's a balancing act, and it's, gosh, it requires effort to be able to balance that and to say, okay, I have these great opportunities, but how am I going to balance that with the whole of my life, like Kinnick the cat, or your children, or other aspects of your personal life? So it's a challenge. It's a balancing act. Exciting times, but you've got to approach everything with really understanding what you're getting into, what the expectations are, and how do you manage that with the whole of your life, not just compartmentalizing life and then work.
Yeah, I would agree that the pandemic has enabled more people to think about their authentic self and what is important to them. Last week at our Tippie Women Summit event, our speaker talked about how she used to always blow dry her hair, but then the pandemic hit and she didn't do it, and she realized that she liked her wavy hair. And then she realized how much time she saved. And so there are odd benefits, but I do think that it has enabled us to think more about our authentic self and what makes us happy, and what we need to do. So
Can I
next,
jump in with two more things?
You
Sorry,
bet.
I love this question so much. But, you know, I talked a little bit about kind of women making progress at kind of upper levels of management into C-suite and things like that. But we can't ignore the fact that there's a huge group of women that have stepped out of the workforce entirely. And so if you think about this as a pipeline, we are, as women, going to be seriously challenged coming up in the next 10 to 15 years, when that group of women who stepped out of the workforce, when their time for progression into those higher level positions happens and they're not there to take the roles. So that is something that we need to really think about as employers, as bosses. We need to think about ways to get women back in the workforce, because we're going to see absolutely backwards movement in terms of women representing in the workforce. The other thing that I think we need to talk about pretty specifically is the option to be able to work at home is great in terms of flexibility, and it allows you to get more stuff done. It may stand in the way of you moving ahead in your organization. And that is something that there's no one answer to. If you have a workforce where everybody's working remotely, that's one thing, but most companies are not going to be in that situation. And there will be people who are closer to the strategic decision makers. And there are people who are going to be getting to know those strategic decision makers on a much more personal level than you will if you're working remotely. So there's two pieces of that. One is, as an employee, you need to make sure that you're continuing to be very visible, not just doing the work as a producer, but visible about thoughts about being a leader. And, you know, I have some ideas that are not just the project I'm working on, but where I'd like to see this go, and making sure that you're getting time with your supervisor to share those ideas. And it may not just be supervisor, but other mentors. You've got to keep that connectivity, and that may end up being on you. As a supervisor, it's also your job to try and keep pulling that out and making sure that you're having consistent interactions with people. If you're giving feedback only to the people you see on a daily basis, but not the people you're on Zoom with, then they're missing out on the opportunity to develop and grow. So there's a lot of challenges that are in there. And I think there's huge benefits that can come with it, but there's also some pitfalls to be avoided.
One of the things I'm going to add, I'm sorry, Barbara.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
One of the things I would add on to what Amy said is, as a leader, it is incumbent on us to listen differently in these situations as well. So for example, I had a woman who went on maternity leave, and when her baby was born, there were some problems with her baby. And so she came back to me and said she was going to resign. And I said, before we go there, let's talk. What are you looking for? And she said, well, I need this, this, and this, and I need to work fewer hours. I'm like, okay, so if we put you on part-time, would you stay? And she said, but Newell doesn't put people on part-time. And I said, well, I don't know that anyone's ever asked. So let's see what we can do. And so now she works 2 days a week. She's an amazing contributor. We couldn't do without her. But if I had gone into the mindset of Newell doesn't do part-time, I would have lost an amazing woman. Instead, we have huge loyalty, and we are doing, she's just setting the world on fire. She's so amazing. But we, as leaders, we have to listen differently and think about different solutions as well.
I think that's a great comment, and it kind of ties to something that was said in the chat about the idea of that glass cliff that Amy mentioned. And, you know, how do you bring people back from burnout, or how do you make sure they don't leave? And I think, Nicole, that is an excellent example of, you know, companies and organizations may need to think outside the box, and it's not always, you know, this is how we've always done it. This is the opportunity for us to think about how we might do things differently in order to be able to keep women engaged and so that we aren't experiencing all that burn off or the glass cliff, if you will. Next, Jen, I want to go to you and ask about what is something that you wish somebody had told you earlier in your career?
I think we've touched on some of them already, but it ties back to an obstacle I faced in Nicole's point that you don't have to know everything all at once. You can learn on the job. So I'm gonna do a two-prong. One is that yes, I don't need to know everything all at once to be able to do the job. I can learn on the job. I can experiment with things. I can learn how to do things my way. It doesn't have to be the way it's always been done. And that's taken me a long time, I think, in my career to realize that, and that's okay. And actually we can come up with some pretty amazing ideas if we think about things that have never been done before, or kind of throw out, this is how it's always been. The second piece is really making sure that I, as a woman, really know what my superpower is, what I'm really, really good at. So if I look back as a faculty member, I'm really proud of my research, right? I was really, really good at that. And there were unique things about my research that I could highlight. And then I've also got to be able to talk about that. So how do I sell myself? How do I talk about the things that I'm really good at, that, no one else can bring to the table? So it would be those two things: believing in yourself, take those risks and challenges, and then be able to talk about the things that you're really great at.
Those are good. I'm going to take a little flip, and we're going to talk about the men in the workplace. So we have a couple of different questions. So one is from somebody who recently started in a leadership role in a new organization. And guess what? She's the only female on the leadership team. So one, she's looking for some tips on how does she establish credibility on this new team. But then in addition, kind of as a backup to that, we do have some questions from what can male leaders do to contribute to the leadership development of women in their organizations. So I think first I might see if Nicole has some thoughts on this. My guess is that she might.
The one thing I would highly encourage everyone to do is to think about what you need and ask for it. Again, I'm going back to gender differences multiple times because a lot of women have assumed things in their behaviors and expectations that are not necessarily fair to them or true. One of the very predominant ones is that I will get noticed for the great work I do. Unfortunately, that is not always the case. So there is a need to, at times, do a little bit of shouting from the rooftops so people see your work, see the outcome of it, and see the results. Because this happens so naturally between men, and they do it all the time, but women just assume it will be seen. So that is something you have to break that mindset so that instead you're proactively sharing your work, the results, and how it's impacting things. And then you need to be clear. So like in my last job at Kimberly-Clark, in my annual review, I told my boss, the president of Latin America at the time, I said, I want to present to the board of directors because I had not presented at that point. And he said, well, I only present once a year. And I said, great, we'll do it together. And he just looked at me like, okay. But if I had not specifically asked for that experience, I never would have gotten it. But because I was crystal clear that I wanted to get in front of the board to understand what board prep is like, to understand that whole process, I never would have been included if I had not asked. So you really need to be super clear on what you need and don't be shy about asking for it. It's really, really important. So that's part one. Part two of the, how can men help? Recognize the female patterns of waiting, just assuming we're going to be recognized. Just don't give them all the mental labor of the team. Do those kinds of things. If you're going into something, how can you bring one of your female leaders with you and bring them along to help teach them the process? And then maybe next time kick it over to them to learn versus going to the person you are always gone with. A lot of this is situational awareness and making sure things don't happen. Are you aware that the women get cut off in meetings 48% of the time more than men? Are you, when people say stuff like that, are you going back and saying, hey, Amy, that was a great point that Jim just built on. Can you tell us more? How do you help give people presence? And how do you make sure that everybody has an equal playing field? Those are the kinds of things all leaders, and especially men, can help with.
Excellent, excellent. And one of our the chats we received kind of backs up that whole documenting your accomplishments to your superiors. Amy, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I figured out how to raise my hand, and I thought I could do that instead of just jump in. Great comments, Nicole, in terms of specific strategies. And I always, because I'm an academic, I always like to give resources. There's a really good book. It's called Good Guys, How Men Can Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace by David Smith and Brad Johnson. It's a very comprehensive research-based book on how men can be better allies. And it includes some of the ideas, Nicole, that you're talking about. It also includes strategies and things that men can do in their own lives to help elevate their partners and make sure that they're getting the support that they need. Really, really good piece. If you're located around Des Moines, I guess everything's online now, so it doesn't matter. But Emily Kestel, who runs the Fearless section in the Des Moines Business Record, just did a feature on this about a month and a half ago or so. And so you can go back and read that article that she put together or order the book itself. It's really quite good about specific strategies, comprehensive strategies for how to bring women forward. Thanks, Bobby, for putting that in the chat there. That's good stuff. So I just wanted to bring that one up too.
Great.
And Barb, could I just add on? And I'm also tying into Stephanie Rourke's question in the chat, resources that the panel has utilized for self-growth in their leadership roles. And so it's not only being able to tout what you're good at, shout that from the rooftops, but I have found that I would think about, okay, what kind of leadership traits or what are skills that I'm really, really uncomfortable with? And so seeking out how I can build those skills. And Amy, I don't know if you remember this, but this is one of my favorite examples. So I work for Amy, and one of my areas that I was really uncomfortable with was negotiations. I don't like negotiations. I get uncomfortable, but I know I have to negotiate. Everything that I do in my job really is a negotiation. So I found a few trainings that I could go to and went to Amy with those. And Amy ended up, supporting me going to a training that I really learned a lot from. But I was proud of myself in that whole process, not only that I got to go and build that skill set, but I joked to myself that I negotiated with Amy, who's a negotiations expert, to get my negotiation training. So, but it was an area I didn't feel comfortable with. I didn't know how to do it well. So, okay, let me do something about that.
So to follow up on that, I'm going to ask Amy and Nicole. Now we know that Jen is working on her negotiation skills. What are the skills that you are working on better doing yourself? So Amy, do you have some thoughts on that?
Sure, I'll jump into mine. This is one that I work on a lot. One is patience. I jump into things rather enthusiastically and recognizing that just because I have a good idea, it means that that's going to require, 50 to 100 hours of work on someone else's part. That's hard because I'm enthusiastic about the idea and I want us to do it and get started. So being more aware of the consequences of what my ideas are for other people is something that I'm working on. If anybody, honestly, I'll ask for help. If anybody has resources on that, please let me know. It's not something that a lot of people talk about. And then the other thing I always try and work on is empathy. The joke in my house is that I heard my 9-year-old daughter saying this at one point to her 11-year-old sister, Ellie, don't you know that if you want to get your problem fixed, you talk to mom, but if you want to feel better about it, you need to go talk to dad. And that was like cold water to the face of, here I am solving problems right and left, but sometimes they just needed to feel better about themselves. And I was not viewed as the parental unit who provided that. So I'm trying to continue to work on empathy and listening and understanding, and then really struggling with how to balance that with when you have to give feedback, that something's not going well, how to do that in a way that is still empathetic, but also gets your points across. And that's just a really precarious line to walk, and it's really hard. And I'm still trying to work on it every day.
Great. What about you, Nicole?
So Amy and I are apparently a hive mind, because those are the two things I am working on as well. I would say that especially from the empathy piece, my husband jokingly tells me not everything has to be efficiency, because that's just how I get things done, right? It's here's a process, here's the most efficient way, boom, 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 let's go. And he's just like, take a moment. And so the challenge of driving to a goal or driving to a task while recognizing there's real life people you're working with, especially in a remote environment where, again, it's a floating head, that is something I'm constantly working on. So, for me, in fact, I will show you on my computer screen, I always have little reminders. So here's a Post-it note that says go slow. Here's a Post-it note that says rationale. And so I leave these on my computer screen because I can have a tendency to go boom, and then people don't know what just hit them. So those are some of the things that I'm working on every day, and I've gotten better, but there's obviously still room to go. So that's what I'm doing.
Good one. Now I'm going to go to another question that was put in through the chat, and this is kind of multi-pronged. So here we have a person who is well established and well known, but in a small community, and a leader in that community, but has a goal of moving to a bigger community. Does any of our panelists have experience with that? How do you make that shift into a new community? How, especially when you hope to, again, achieve a sense of leadership when you're there? Any advice, I guess, for this person seeking that change?
I'll jump in on that one a little bit, which might be surprising considering that I haven't really jumped out of companies. The connectivity that Nicole was talking about earlier, when I used to teach my MBA class on management, we talked about networks, kind of a web of networked relationships. And we tend to think about those internally to our organization, but those networks outside of your organization are absolutely critical if you're going to make that jump over to another area. And that, for me, that has come really nicely in the form of, we have a Big Ten business school deans group that we get together, and we talk frequently at conferences when they happen and online. I also have a group of women deans that I meet with, and it is a group of people that, we just had a conference, and at the end of the conference, our last topic was, so if you want to be a president, what's your next step? And it was a discussion with each other about what are the capabilities. There were women who were already presidents or have been presidents who came back and spoke to us. And it was a recognition around the room of each other of saying, so when I get the call that says, hey, do you want to apply for this position, that I may not want it, but I need to know that Nicole and Jen and Barb do want to apply for that. And then I need to put their names in for it. So that connectivity with another group of people who are going to be your advocates to that broader group is pretty critical. And you can't just go to them when you need something. You need to have established those relationships in advance so that when you do decide that you're ready, or somebody thinks that you're ready, they're the ones who are kind of pushing you to do it.
So Barb, can I jump in here and
You bet.
Mention something in the chat? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Manisha wrote in here, when women are firm or strict about something, not ready to negotiate, coworkers are often casually comment, she may be having mood swings / PMS. First of all, that is not okay. Let's start there. Okay. You do not have to put up with that. But here is the challenge. you cannot respond aggressively or in kind, because if you do, it's going to be like, see, and that's the response you're going to get. So I would like everybody on this call to learn a fabulous phrase. And the phrase is, what do you mean by that? Because you have to learn how to say it. It can't be, what do you mean by that? It has to be, what do you mean by that? And when they say, oh, you know, no, what do you mean by that? And they will either hang themselves or they will figure out they're being a jerk. But you need to figure out how to respond in those situations to make people own their behavior, and they have to own it themselves. You can't point it out to them. So that is my stock phrase I go to whenever I hear anybody do things like this. Now, obviously, if it's overtly harassing, racism, any to call it immediately. But if it's these borderline ones, oh, she's just being moot. What do you mean by that? It will come in very handy for you.
Quite true. Here's another comment from the chat that I thought kind of raises an interesting question. It says, a lot of female leaders adopt masculine traits to progress in their careers, which can be a challenge to the younger women coming up behind them. Any tips on working with those more masculine female leaders that are ahead of you? Any thoughts on that?
I can jump in again. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot. I would tell you that the acceptance of style is becoming much more open. And a lot of senior leaders now maybe did not have that flexibility before. And I remember being at a meeting where Brene Brown was presenting, and I looked over and I saw one of our female COOs with tears coming down her face, because she had the internal recognition that she was not being her authentic self. She was putting on her work self in order to get things done. And I would tell you that a lot of the senior leaders now are coming to that recognition that what I did to get here and how I adapted myself is maybe not the best way for me to continue to win, because it's through authenticity that we all thrive. And anytime you start to manipulate yourself to try to put yourself in a different form, you're never going to be able to thrive the way you want to. Now, that being said, that's an internal recognition that you're not going to have a senior, tell a senior leader, do you realize, that's not going to happen. What I would tell you is you need to continue to be your authentic self, and you need to figure out what makes you happy and what makes you thrive. And there are going to be places and roles that you go to where you think, you know what, this is not my jam, I cannot stay here, and that's okay. That is fine. Just make sure you exit with grace and have a new plan to go somewhere else. And then there's going to be other places that you step in and absolutely fly. But part of that is the giving yourself permission to say, this is not okay for me, and I think I need to step out. Because again, many women view that as failure. It is not. That is absolutely self-advocacy and something you need to do.
Excellent. So we have a question in the Q&A that I'm going to send to Jen Blackhurst. Jen, the question is about our MBA program. So it specifically says, one way to help women in leadership is to show more examples of women in those roles. And in some of the MBA programs, there tend to be a lot of use of cases, business cases, and many of those tend to use male examples. Are there initiatives within our program to make sure that those examples are more even?
Yes, I'm really glad, Penny, that you brought this up. So that is something that we are addressing really on multiple fronts. So first is we have a group within the college that focuses on DEI initiatives throughout all of our programs, throughout all of our employees. And one of the tasks that they've been talking about is getting a library of all of the cases that we're using, because you're right, many of the cases that have been written in the past are white male dominated, or the hero in the case is a man and the woman not so much. So that is something that we're actively looking at, making sure that we are doing a better job on having cases that are populated with women as leaders as well. Even more than that, though, we are making efforts in things like offering a new class on DEI that's taught by Dr. Ken Brown and Dr. Michelle Williams. We are focusing in our analytics programs on making sure that we're training people about bias in data and how bias in data can impact decisions in companies in really unintended and detrimental ways. So it's an area that I know is important to me personally. I know it's important to Amy as our dean, and yes, that is something that we're looking at. Even, you know, deeper than that, Amy's been a proponent of, as we've been hiring people, are we inclusive in the people that we bring to campus? Are we showing that we can be a great community for women in finance, or in my case, a woman in analytics, or representation across the board? And a lot of effort is going on within our departments to hire faculty and staff with diverse backgrounds and ideas that they can bring to the table. Amy, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I'll just point out Josie's comment in the chat. Josie's a wonderful staff member here at the University of Iowa, and also an adjunct for us in the Tippie College. And, you know, she does what some of us have really been working on recently, which is making sure that you're bringing in speakers that are representative of, you know, whether it's gender or race or age or physical ability level, you know, whatever it might be, making sure that you've got leaders that are coming in that represent all of those domains. And it's something we're really working on. We're also working on, with Michelle's help, Dr. Michelle Williams, inclusive classrooms. So how do we make discussions in classrooms feel like you're able to contribute to them? How do we make the environment in a classroom feel like you're able and represented in that classroom of being a full participant? And that starts with the materials we present. It starts with the people we put up in the front of the room. It starts with a lot of things, and then are carried through in terms of discussion and how you work with that. So we're really working on educating our faculty on that particular area. Yeah, great comments, Laura, about non-binary inclusion in leadership. Use of pronouns matters. You know, all of those things I think people are trying to learn and figure things out and how to do it better. And so being patient with people, educating in a way that is helpful, and all of that really matters. You know, talking to people in private conversations, I've found to be probably a better way than addressing it broadly to a whole group. But, you know, there's different times for different strategies. So all of those are really critical, and we're working on it. All I can say is we continue to be a work in progress.
Right. Well, so we're kind of starting to come close to the end of our time. So there's one more topic that I kind of want to throw out to the group, and that has to do with communication and feedback. So there's been a couple of different comments in the chat that talk about, you know, how do you provide feedback so that it is not seen as being negative or not a team player when you're kind of pointing out things. But then also on the flip side, as a leader, how do you seek out feedback on your own performance, on how you are doing in order to get better? So it's kind of a two-pronged, but it's communicating about feedback, both to the people that you work with, but also for your own performance. So Amy, is that something you're comfortable taking?
Sure, I will. In terms of providing feedback, and, you know, of course, this is a challenge to answer because I have two people on my team that are here on the panel, so they could say whether I'm doing it or not. I think feedback is important for people to get because I've seen too many people work in a way that they think is working, and it's not. And it's unfair to let them keep working that way. So I feel like it is important to share that information, but it can be absolutely gut-wrenching to hear that information, and it can rip you to pieces. And, typically you get that feedback when you're maybe not in your best, you're not in your best place anyway, and that's why you're getting the feedback. So it's really hard. I think partnering feedback on specific behaviors, here are things that you could do that specifically would make a difference, and partnering that with the fact that you're a really valued person of this team, and you bring so much capability, and here's 99 things that are fabulous about what you do, and here's one thing that needs to be worked on or needs to be addressed. They're going to focus in on the one thing no matter what. It's just really hard, but continuing that message of, even if that one piece of feedback is true, so are all the other great things about you. Sorry,
Anyone
that
else
doesn't
want
answer the
to
second
add to
half.
that?
I would add on to it that when I do reviews with people, yes, I have to give them feedback about what opportunities are, but the way I do them is saying, but here are your strengths. And so recognizing that this is an opportunity, let's identify which of your strengths can help build this up and how we can approach it. And what are the skills, experiences, opportunities that we can put together to help work on this. And I always commit to my people that I will walk them through it, and I will tell them, I'll be the biggest cheerleader when they do it well, and I'll let them know when maybe they could have done it better. But I always take a strengths-based approach because everybody has opportunities, everyone. And so it's never going to be a time where someone does it perfectly. So lean into where you are good is one of the things. Now, when I ask for feedback for myself personally, both to the people who report to me and more broadly, this is where you have to demonstrate a little bit of vulnerability. And again, I mentioned Brene Brown earlier. She's a fantastic author in this, and she can really help you do this. But I would say, hey, you know what, Amy, I'm working on trying to communicate a bit more empathetically. And here's a couple examples where I think I did it okay. Here's a couple of examples where I think it could have been better. Can you help me understand how I could approach that differently? And would you help me figure this out when we're doing things? Because if you just go in and say, can I have feedback? Everyone's going to be like, oh, you're great. Everything's fine, even though you're working on things. But if you're willing to demonstrate a little bit of vulnerability to help people come in, you will get much further.
Excellent. Okay, so we have just a minute or two. So I'm going to put our panelists on the spot, and I'm going to ask you if you could briefly provide any thoughts for an aspiring leader. What would you want to say to them? What would you say to an aspiring leader to help them on their path to glory, let's say? Jen, I might go to you first. You ready?
Yes, I actually am going to build on what Nicole just talked about. So really understanding where your strengths are and how you can leverage your strengths in roles that you want to move into, and being able to talk about and demonstrate and advertise these strengths and how they're going to feed into the next role that you want. Seeking out leaders that also will, I can't remember, I think it might have been Nicole talking about, who will give you the opportunity, to go to a meeting, to learn something, to take on a task that's, above the level that you're at right now in an organization, so that you can learn. You can do this. So build up the skills, build up your network to be able to go to the next level.
Great. How about you, Nicole?
I think it's, first of all, having confidence in yourself. You are where you are for a reason. And if people are talking about you for other things, it's for a reason. That imposter syndrome sucks, and we all have it. We all have it. But you have demonstrated great work. So have confidence in yourself would be one of the things. The other things is, I think Amy mentioned at the beginning of the call, create opportunities for yourself to demonstrate value. So like for people who are going to be graduating soon, When you show up to the company is when you figure out all the stuff that's stupid, right? Do you realize that I couldn't even get a credit card for 6 weeks, so I couldn't travel? All of that stuff gets forgotten once you're in a company, right? So write all that down and then go to your boss and say, hey, I would love to share with you some of the things that I think we could improve our onboarding experience on, and I would love to help. You are uniquely positioned to do those kinds of things. And that's creating an opportunity for someone to go, oh my gosh, they stepped up and are trying to make us all better. So I'm not saying sign up for every massive project or things like that, but there are things that you can do that can get you a little bit of a spotlight that can only help you continue to move forward.
Excellent. And Amy, any thoughts?
Okay, I'll do it really fast. I know some folks are leaving us, but thank you all, first of all, just for being here today. It's been terrific and your questions are fabulous. So on Nicole's point, this idea of demonstrating initiative, I will say, you know, now that I'm kind of in this position and I can look across the college, the people who do their jobs well, I totally value and appreciate, and we need every bit of it. But the ones I'm thinking about for leadership roles are the ones that come in and say, hey, I had this idea, you know, you mentioned this thing that we're trying to do, and I have some ideas about that. So that it's leadership emergence, right? Is demonstrating before you're asked to do something, demonstrating that you have some ideas and can take initiative. On the personal side, I would go with the mantra that I keep telling myself, which is you can be the leader that you are best suited to be. So I was very nervous to step into a role as a dean because I had an image in my head of what I thought a dean should be able to do. And I had really fabulous people saying, you don't have to be that dean. You should be the dean that you can be best, because it's Jen's point. Bring your superpower to that role and you'll do some great things, and you'll do some things not as well as someone else would do, but you'll do some things better. And then when you move on to your next role, somebody else can come in and do the things that you didn't do. That is what leadership is about, right? Is understanding what true value you bring to the table and how do you highlight that, not being somebody else's leader.
Well, all excellent points. I want to really thank all of our panelists today. I know that Nicole has to kind of head off to the next thing as well. But we do want to thank everyone for joining us for this, for your great questions, for your great thoughts, and participating in this. A reminder that this will be recorded, or has been recorded, and will be posted on our YouTube page. In addition, when the event ends, you will receive a quick survey. And so we'd be grateful if you could share your thoughts and help us make sure that our future events are even better. We want to make sure that we see you virtually at some of our future Tippie webinars, including the Imposter Syndrome, which is our next one for the Tippie Women Summit on March 25th. So thank you all for joining us. And as always, go Hawks.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you, Shannon.